June 13, 1944. A narrow, sun-dappled road outside the French village of Villers-Bocage. For the men of the 7th Armored Division, known famously as the Desert Rats, the morning air was thick with the scent of summer hedgerows and the metallic tang of diesel. They were the spearhead of the British advance, moving with a confidence born from years of desert warfare. But deep within the dense bocage, a monster was waiting. Michael Wittmann, the most feared tank ace of the Third Reich, sat in the commander's cupola of a 56-ton Tiger I. To the German gunners, Allied armor had always been slow, predictable, and easily crushed by the superior range of their 88mm KWK-36 cannons. They expected a slaughter. What they encountered instead was a blur of olive-drab steel that defied the very laws of armored engagement they had mastered on the Eastern Front. As the first shells whistled through the air, the British didn't dig in or retreat. They accelerated. The Cromwell tank, the fastest cruiser Britain had ever produced, was about to turn the math of the Normandy campaign upside down. German intelligence had briefed their crews on the heavy Churchill and the reliable Sherman, but they were unprepared for a machine that could cross a field at 40 miles per hour. This wasn't just a change in equipment. It was a fundamental shift in the philosophy of war. The Germans had built their panzers to be mobile fortresses, slow, heavy, and lethal at a distance. The British, however, had bet everything on a different variable: kinetic energy. They realized that in the tight, claustrophobic lanes of Normandy, the ability to disappear was more valuable than the thickest steel plate. On that June morning, the myth of German invincibility began to fracture, not because the British had bigger guns, but because the Germans simply couldn't catch them in their sights. The Cromwell was a predator of a different breed, a machine designed to exploit the one fatal weakness buried deep within the engineering of the Tiger and the Panther. As the engines of the 7th Armored roared to life, the German gunners realized with mounting dread that their sophisticated optics were calibrated for a world that was suddenly moving too fast to track. To understand why the Cromwell was such a shock to the German system, one has to look at the rigid doctrine that governed Panzertrupp training. Since the early successes of the Blitzkrieg, German tank design had evolved toward a specific peak: the heavy breakthrough tank. By 1944, the Tiger I and the Panther dominated the battlefield through a combination of optics and firepower. German gunners were trained on the Zeiss TZF-9B binocular telescope, a piece of equipment that allowed them to identify and engage targets at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards. Their entire combat philosophy was built on the standoff engagement, sitting stationary or moving slowly while picking off Allied armor before it could get close enough to return fire. The math was in their favor. A Sherman or a Churchill had to close the distance to effectively penetrate a Tiger's frontal armor, and during that transit, they were easy targets to track. But the Cromwell broke the fundamental variable of that equation: time. While a Panther could reach 34 miles per hour on a test track, its combat speed across broken terrain was significantly lower, often restricted by its complex and fragile overlapping roadwheel system. The Cromwell, powered by the 600 horsepower Rolls-Royce Meteor engine, a derated version of the legendary Merlin engine that powered the Spitfire, was a different animal entirely. It possessed a power-to-weight ratio of nearly 21 horsepower per ton, compared to the Tiger's meager 12. This meant that the Cromwell didn't just have a high top speed. It had explosive acceleration. In the dense foliage and winding roads of the Calvados region, a Cromwell could transition from a dead stop to its maximum cruising speed in seconds. For a German gunner peering through a narrow-angle optic, a target moving at nearly 50 feet per second was almost impossible to lead correctly. The Zeiss optics, while crystal clear, had a limited field of vision. Once the Cromwell entered its sprint, it would often move across the gunner's entire field of view before the heavy German turret could even begin to swing into position. This mechanical lag was the secret crisis of the German armored corps. The very weight that made the Tiger a fortress made it a prisoner of its own physics, unable to pivot its turret fast enough to keep pace with a British cruiser that refused to play by the established rules of engagement. The mechanical soul of this disparity lay in the contrast between British and German automotive engineering. The British designers at Birmingham Railway Carriage and Wagon Company had realized that the modern battlefield was no longer a static line of trenches, but a fluid, three-dimensional space where the fastest mover dictated the terms of the fight. By installing the Rolls-Royce Meteor engine into the Cromwell, they gave the British tankers a degree of tactical agility that was virtually unheard of in 1944. To a German crew in a Panther, the Cromwell appeared like a phantom. The Panther's turret traverse system was slaved to its main engine speed. At a low combat idle, a full 360-degree rotation could take up to 60 seconds. In that same minute, a Cromwell moving at its top speed of 40 miles per hour could travel nearly 1,200 yards, essentially circling a stationary German tank before its gun barrel could even complete a quarter turn. This was the traverse trap. German gunners were trained to use a technique called leading the target, where they would aim ahead of a moving vehicle based on its estimated speed. However, the Cromwell's acceleration was so nonlinear that these estimates were almost always wrong. A British driver could jink the tank, rapidly shifting gears and changing direction, causing the German gunner to constantly overcorrect. Every time the German gunner adjusted his aim, he had to fight the inertia of his massive turret, whereas the Cromwell's light 75mm gun was mounted in a turret that could spin much faster and more smoothly. British training manuals from the Royal Armoured Corps emphasized this advantage, instructing crews to always keep the tracks moving. They knew that a stationary Cromwell was a dead Cromwell, but a Cromwell in motion was a target that defied the standard fire control mathematics of the Wehrmacht. This high-speed maneuverability allowed the British to close the lethal gap. The distance where the German 88mm gun was effective, but the British 75mm gun was not. By the time a German commander had identified the threat and shouted the range to his gunner, the Cromwell had often already closed 300 yards and moved to a flanking position, turning the Tiger's thick frontal armor into a useless wall of steel while exposing its vulnerable, paper-thin side plates to a point-blank British round. The tactical reality of these high-speed engagements created a psychological burden for German crews that history often overlooks. In the open deserts of North Africa, tank battles were often fought like naval engagements, with clear lines of sight and predictable movement. But in the Bocage of Normandy, the Cromwell transformed the battlefield into a frantic, close-quarters brawl. British crews, particularly those in the 7th Armored and the 11th Armored Divisions, began to utilize stalking tactics that exploited the Cromwell's low-profile and silent-running Christie suspension system. Unlike the Tiger, which announced its presence with a high-pitched metallic squeal from its tracks and a thunderous engine note, a Cromwell could idle forward with surprising stealth. This allowed British tankers to reach clobbering range before the Germans even realized a threat was present. When the engagement began, the British doctrine was to saturate the area with smoke and high-explosive rounds, further obscuring the vision of the already strained German gunners. Through the smoke, the Cromwells would dash from one hedgerow to another, appearing as fleeting shadows. To a German gunner, whose turret was hand-cranked for fine adjustments, trying to lead a Cromwell was like trying to swat a fly with a sledgehammer. The physical exertion required to manually traverse a 56-ton turret when the hydraulic drive couldn't keep up was exhausting. By the second or third minute of a high-speed engagement, German crews were often physically and mentally spent, their reaction times slowing just as the British were pressing their advantage. This was further compounded by the Cromwell's reliability. While the Panther's final drive was notorious for failing under the stress of rapid pivoting, the Cromwell's Meteor engine and Merritt-Brown gearbox were designed for high-stress maneuvering. A Cromwell could spin on its own axis, a neutral turn, with a speed that would strip the gears of a Tiger. This allowed the British to constantly reorient their frontal armor toward the enemy while simultaneously moving toward a flank. The result was a tactical paradox. The superior German tanks were being outcalculated and outmaneuvered by a machine that they had dismissed as too lightly armored to be a threat. By the time the battle for Caen reached its peak, the German High Command was receiving reports of phantom British units that seemed to be in 3 places at once, a direct result of the Cromwell's ability to disengage and reappear on a different axis faster than the German intelligence could process. The disparity in tactical mobility reached its zenith during the Great Swan, the rapid Allied breakout across northern France following the collapse of the German 7th Army at Falaise. During this pursuit, the Cromwell's engineering truly eclipsed the heavy panzers. While the Tiger and Panther were designed for a defensive holding war, they were strategically immobile. Their high fuel consumption and mechanical fragility meant they were often abandoned by their crews during long-range retreats. In contrast, the Cromwells of the 11th Armored Division covered an astonishing 250 miles in just 6 days. This operational tempo was a weapon in itself. German gunners, already reeling from the chaos of the retreat, found that by the time they established a defensive screen, the British recce units had already bypassed them. The speed of the Cromwell allowed British commanders to practice a form of velocity-based reconnaissance, where they would intentionally drive at high speeds past suspected German positions to draw fire, confident that the enemy's slow turret traverse and aiming cycle couldn't react before the tank reached the next piece of cover. This was a terrifying gamble, but the statistics supported it. British after-action reports noted that in encounters where a Cromwell was moving at more than 15 miles per hour, the probability of a first-round hit from a German 75mm or 88mm gun dropped by nearly 60%. The German fire control system was simply not designed for high angular velocity targets at close to medium range. Even the elite Panzer Lehr division found their tactical cohesion shattering when faced with Cromwells that could sprint into the heart of their columns, sow destruction, and vanish before a coordinated counterfire could be organized. The Cromwell proved that a tank's protection isn't just a matter of millimeters of steel. It is a product of the time it spends in the enemy's sights. By minimizing that time to the absolute physical limit, the British cruisers achieved a level of survivability that no amount of German heavy armor could replicate. The myth of the invincible heavy tank was dismantled not by a bigger shell, but by a faster engine, proving that in the geometry of armored warfare, speed is the ultimate armor. September 4, 1944, the Belgian port of Antwerp. While the German High Command scrambled to reorganize a shattered front, the British 11th Armored Division, the famed Black Bull, achieved a feat of armored endurance that defied every convention of the war. In a single day, their Cromwell tanks covered over 60 miles, seizing the vital docks before the German 15th Army could even begin their planned demolitions. This was the Great Swan in its most potent form, and it highlighted the ultimate strategic failure of the German heavy tank philosophy. As the Cromwells surged through the Low Countries, the roads behind them were littered with the abandoned husks of Panthers and Tigers. These German machines, for all their tactical lethality, were operational liabilities during a high-speed retreat. Their complex transmissions and final drives, designed for the slow, grinding defense of the Eastern Front, disintegrated under the strain of continuous road marching. The Cromwell's Rolls-Royce Meteor engine, however, proved to be one of the most reliable power plants of the entire conflict. British crews reported that their tanks could run for thousands of miles with only basic maintenance, a luxury that German tankers could only dream of. By the time the British crossed into Germany in 1945, the Cromwell had redefined what a cruiser tank could be. It wasn't just a vehicle for flanking on the battlefield. It was a tool for strategic pursuit that allowed the Allies to move faster than the German communication lines could react. German veterans would later recount the frustration of trying to aim at these brown streaks that ignored the heavy armor of the front lines to strike deep into the rear echelons. The Cromwell demonstrated that while the Tiger could win a duel, the Cromwell could win a campaign. It proved that kinetic energy, when harnessed through reliable engineering and aggressive leadership, creates a tactical vacuum that slow, heavy armor simply cannot fill. This legacy of speed and reliability paved the way for the post-war main battle tank, ensuring that the lessons learned in the hedgerows of Normandy would never be forgotten. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the engineering of the Desert Rats, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more untold stories from the battlefields of World War II.